Greetings everybody, and welcome to my Wednesday night favorites here on the Prog Monster. My name is Murph. I am the host of this show, a show dedicated to progressive rock and other forms of rock music. So this one I've been working on for a few months now. The first one I did of this nature was exploded. It's the biggest explosion of views I've had of any video I've done. I'm not really even sure why, but anyways, I felt that it was, and people have asked for this, a second video on the same subject. So the original video was my 10 favorite must-own progressive rock albums. Everybody should have, right? This one will be called 10 more progressive rock albums that everybody should or could have in their collection. Now, I didn't want this to be just another group of albums. You know, I could have done a top 20 if I was going to do that, do 20 albums that everybody should own and just have done that, but I didn't want to do that. So this is a little bit different. So by now people have had a couple of months, 3 months to get into some of these albums if indeed that's what they decided to do. And so now we're at a stage where they've been listening to most of this stuff for, I guess about longer than a few months. I can't remember how long ago it was, but it was long enough that people had a chance to digest and listen to and own some of these albums for their collection. So I decided, so what should we do next? Should we just repeat and do 10 more essential albums? Yeah, we could easily do that. There's like enough you could do 90 albums like that, but it doesn't seem to go where I want to go. So what I did is I picked 10 other albums that you should have in your collection, but they expand the realm of progressive rock. So you get some space rock stuff and some stuff that may be closer to psychedelic, and some stuff that have other types of music mixed in, but definitely have some progressive rock elements to the music. Maybe some space pop in here. Some bands that came out of the original, the original progressive movement in the early 70s. They also had another progressive movement. The second wave of progressive rock came out in the 1980s, and then again in the 1990s. But I thought that we should have some bands that represent all of these, but albums that are absolute musts. That's the bottom line here. There are albums that you should really actually consider owning if you want to be in this genre and enjoy it. And so I'm trying, this one is basically more to expand that. I've included only one band that had an album on the original 10. Originally I wasn't going to have any, but then I thought, oh, this band has to have a second album here, and that album has to be the one I chose for a reason, which I'll get to when we get there. So I'm going to do this. For those of you who watched the first video, I'm going to do this exactly the same way I did with the first one, but instead of it being about those albums, it's going to be about new, different groups. Every group here is different except for the one, and I'm going to do it exact same way I did them, which was alphabetically. So we'll go from the first band, and then the last band will all be in alphabetical order. There's not a ranking here. I don't think of this as a ranking. These are just albums I think are all really classic albums by these bands, that if you're moving out into the progressive rock genre and you're like, where do I go? Which albums should I move to now that I've done these 10? You're probably getting a good feeling from where you want to go with those bands. But these are all other bands that have some elements of progressive rock, some elements of space rock, some elements that folk space or pop, progressive pop or folk, progressive folk, all that kind of stuff. So I wanted to get some of these albums in there. And these are a lot of these are more of my personal favorites than the first one was more of albums. And I've got this book sticking in my back here, sorry. They were more of what I thought were the best albums based on what I've been listening to or my own preferences. These ones are a little bit leaning more towards my own preferences, not so much what the public may think are the best albums, because as you all know, And we've all come to discover, if you're watching these type of shows, and there's plenty of these type of shows on the YouTube, it's all subjective, all of it. What I love may not be what you love. I'm hopeful that if you're watching my show, you kind of have the same kind of interest in the music I do. So if you hear something I like, you might say, hey, if he likes it, I probably might like it as well. And that's pretty much how this works. And it's the same with me when I watch other shows. Certain people, I know they like things the same way I do. So when they recommend something that they like, I say, you know what, I'm going to listen to this, because if they like it, there's a good chance I will as well. Okay, having said all that, I want to get to it. So we're going to do this, like I said, in alphabetical order. The first 9 are all bands that weren't in my first collection, but are currently, I'm going to get some water because my throat is dry, but are currently going to be in this one. And then one other band that was in the first one, I think needs to be in this one, and you'll see why when we get to it. Okay, so we're going to start out with a band that I almost included in my first series, but you can only choose so many albums, and I chose Camel's Moon Madness over this because I think it lends itself easier to people getting into prog than this one. But this one is still very good. Lots of really melodic kind of keyboards and guitar and spacey sound to their music, almost Floydish in their music in some ways, but just so good. The instrumentation is really good. This album, I've always found this band has bright album covers, like really attractive, and they lead to that space rock genre, which is part of the prog rock, under the prog rock envelope. But if you're not listening for space rock, you might not get into this band. So I wanted to bring them up, and the album I chose, of course, is this one, Eloy's Colors. Now I could have went with Dawn, or I could have went with Planets, or there's a number of albums, but I think this one lends itself easiest to this band. It's really catchy. All the tunes on here are good. There's no bad songs on this album. This was my first album. It was recommended to me by a couple of other people, and I thought, you know what, I will listen to them, and I got this album, and I've been just so happy with it. It's got 8 tracks plus 2 bonuses. The bonus, Wings of Vision and Silhouettes, the Silhouettes is the single, and the Wings of Vision are, I think it's just an added track. It is. Okay, so then you have Horizons, Illuminations, Giant, Impressions, Child Migration. Child Migration is such a good song. It's just, even though Frank Borman's vocals are kind of hard to take sometimes, I think these are one of the better ones that he does. And you get used to his voice, so don't let that put you off. You'll get used to his voice, and the music is too good to pass on. You have Silhouettes, one of the great tunes on this album. Fantastic song. One of my favorite, if not my favorite, Eloy song. Of course, I didn't say the band. This is Colors by Eloy. I guess I should have said that, eh? Well, I'm old, so I'm hoping you're going to cut me some slack for that. So anyways, look at the artwork on this, and, the rear end of that girl, notwithstanding, the artwork is fantastic. The album lends itself to that spacey feel. You almost feel like you're looking at a different planet. Just really catchy stuff, really spacey, but lots of progressive elements here. The keyboards are dominating. The guitar, like I said, is really catchy and good, and the other 2 instrumentation, the bass and the drums, fantastic as well. So if you're looking for some space rock in the prog rock genre to move into, I highly recommend this album. I think it's a must if you're moving in that direction. So Eloy's Colors. So the next album up is a band that is somewhat difficult to digest and to get into, because the music is complex as all hell. That's a mild way to put it. Very complex arrangements, very complex melodies, lots of different types of instrumentation, probably more than any other band. These guys have about 60 instruments on any given album that they play. Their melodies are really good. All the singers get together and they do a lot of different type of harmonies. They've got some folk element to their music. They definitely got lots of progressive elements to their music. They even got a little bit of bopping on this album. There's a couple of kind of, I would call them upbeat, up-tempo, maybe a little funky, if you like, on this album. It's a really solid album. I love the cover. It's one of their better covers. We're talking about Gentle Giant. I chose this album. Some people would probably maybe choose Octopus, or maybe In a Glass House, which are both good albums, and I like them a lot. But for some reason, this one I think is a little different than them, a little more accessible too. The music is a little bit, I hate the word they use, commercial, with Gentle Giant. They don't go together. But this one isn't really commercial, but it's just much more accessible than some of the other stuff. And you've got Derek Shulman and his brother Ray here. You've got Kerry Manier, Gary Green, and John Weathers on this album. All of them doing different types of instruments. Everybody playing a bunch of different stuff. Derek Shulman, Kerry Manier doing vocals at times. Ray Shulman, underrated bass player, but also great violinist. Like, just some really, really solid stuff on this album. If you are looking to get into that kind of folky kind of aspect of progressive rock, but you also like lots of keyboards and lots of time signature changes and complexity and great lyrics and fantastic vocals, this is a fantastic album. I highly recommend you get this one. You could go with Octopus too if you want a little bit less upbeat but more kind of pastoral. Not that it's pastoral, but it's a little harder to get into, even harder than less easy to get into would be Three Friends, or probably the most would be the second album, Face. Is it Face? I can't even remember what it's called. It's my favorite album, but I don't remember. But anyways, this one is the one I've chosen for this episode because I think this is the one that will lead to a lot of good stuff for this band. Give it a try. Okay, the next album up, another kind of spacey rock group. This is clearly considered their magnus opus. I do like one other album quite a bit. Came out, I think, just after this album or just before, I can't remember, one or the other. But anyways, lots of space rock elements here, kind of heavy, very melodic. They stay within a certain sound, but they do it so well, and they like that repetitive sound, but it's really good, really spacey, and with some very good guitar parts and keyboard parts. Vocals are strong. You got a couple of different guys doing vocals here, but definitely an album that I highly recommend you get if you're going to get into that genre. And we're talking about Hawkwind here. Sorry, let me get over here. Hawkwind's Hall of the Mountain Grill. Such a great cover, eh? Look at that. That's fantastic. Spaceship crashing into Earth. I love the back part too. Nice mountainy range, spacey looking. So for space rock, I highly recommend Hawkwind as well as Eloy. Both really solid bands. This is one solid song after another. Probably my favorite though would be Psychedelic Warlord, to Disappear in Smoke. I just really think the vocals on that are strong. Lemmy Kilmister's on here. I know if you're not familiar with Lemmy, he's the lead vocalist from Motorhead. I know, how does that happen? But most people are aware that he started out here with Hawkwind, and the Hall of Mountain Girl is really strong. Goat Willow, another great tune I like. Wind of Change, another fantastic tune. This is a prolific album, really good. Highly recommend it. So Hawkwind, Hall of the Mountain Grill. Okay, the next album up is an album that I absolutely love, and I wanted to give some kind of attention to that second wave of progressive rock music that came out in the early 80s. Once the original bands had all kind of gotten away from that progressive sound, it was actually considered that progressive rock was dead, and they all had moved on to, more poppy, more commercial sounding. A lot of them did. Almost all, maybe not Pink Floyd, but a lot of them did. But this was then another group of rock bands came along and started it all over again. A lot of them sounding very similar to the original bands that put it out. This one, no exception. Lots of Genesis sounding music here. There's a little bit of Pink Floyd in there too. I hear a little bit of that here and there. Just a really solid album though. Like every single tune on here I absolutely think is brilliant. And they got that strong Genesis flavor to their music, which I like quite a bit, because you weren't getting that with Genesis. You were getting Turn It On Again and that kind of stuff, which is okay, but I wanted my Genesis, and so I think this band really helps with that. And this particular album, IQ, Dark Matter, my particular favorite of their albums. Wake is another really good album, maybe an album that you might consider getting if you're getting into this band. This is a bit of a darker album, but it really has a lot of that Peter Gabriel era sounding Genesis, and if you like that, this is a good one here to choose. If you prefer to try expand a little bit, maybe Wake is a better album for you. Certainly it's a great album. You wouldn't go wrong with either of these albums, but for today I'm going to choose Dark Matter as an essential IQ album, second wave of progressive rock from the 1980s. Gives you a chance to explore that genre, as I did. They brought that genre to my forefront. I wasn't aware of them other than one other band, but I wanted to give them some attention, and that's the album I chose. So this next one was kind of an odd thing. It almost didn't make this list. I was going to go with Gong. But I found Gong a little bit too far into the psychedelic realm, not really progressive, so I didn't think it really fit here, although I do like them quite a bit. But this band has a little bit of that, but also a lot of folky stuff on their album. They have a lot of really good instrumentation, some really interesting sounds to their music, definitely some progressive stuff that's really good, lots of flute, lots of guitar. Sorry, the album came loose here. And there are some songs on here I absolutely adore. Born on the Solar Wind, yeah, a great tune. The first couple of tracks are really strong too. So we're talking about Jade Warrior. I don't know if you can see that. I love this album cover too. It's fantastic. Jade Warrior, Last Autumn's Dream. I've tried to get more stuff from them. It's not as easy to find, but this one is, I think, their best. At least the one that I like the most at the moment. Lots of really good stuff on here. The guy's vocals are strong. The album, of course, as you see, some great artwork on it. Just fantastic. Almost medieval-like, really strong. The music has its really folky elements. There are a couple of songs that are almost kind of funky. It's kind of weird, but there's a lot of really interesting guitar and keyboard parts on this album as well. Anyways, a band that I've come to like quite a bit, and they're currently on my playlist. So I think this album is the album that I would recommend you try. I haven't really tried the other ones, but I wanted to mention the band, so here they are. Okay, so now we've done 5, so the next 5. This album should be something that a lot of people are quite aware of. They will probably know this band. They're part of the second wave of progressive rock, but probably the face of that wave, and we're talking about Marillion. And I chose this album, Misplaced Childhood, mostly because I think it's a little more commercial. If you want to get into Marillion, this one's a little easier on the ear to get into. The other albums, a little more complex. My favorite is Clutches with Straws, really fantastic album, but I would highly recommend this one to start. This one has the big hit Kaylee. It has lots of really solid stuff on here. The thing I like about the singer Fish is he just really pours himself into his music. His emotions are like right on his sleeve. It just, you don't see a lot of that in music, and he is just one of those people that's good. And this album is just so good. Lots of really good keyboards, lots of guitar parts. The vocals are fantastic. A little busy, typical of Peter Gabriel type singing, you know, and this band has a lot of that Genesee sound to it as well. Maybe not as much as IQ, but definitely has some of that. And they kind of are the poster face for that second wave, but still they need to be represented here. I thought they were actually on the first one, and maybe I screwed it up. But anyways, they're not on it. When they are this one, they had to be. Okay, so now we're getting down to the final four. Of course, it's alphabetical, so I want to reiterate, this isn't about my favorite first and my least favorite. It kind of worked out that way on the first one, that because they were alphabetically, they kind of worked in that way. The better ones were closer to the end, but still, it's just alphabetical. This group I chose because I wanted to give some attention to the more modern progressive rock movement amongst different bands. This band has a lot of Rush influence to it. You can hear it, but they are their own sound. The vocalists very different. Guitars are great on this album. It's just great, and the keyboards are so good as well. And every time I listen to this, I just like it more. And somebody turned me on to it, and I'm happy that. And this is Riverside's. There it is, Riverside Identity. This is their most recent album, came out this year. You know, just like, look at that art. It's so good. It's so modern too. Like, this album has a really modern feel to it. It's not, and yeah, they do have a kind of Rush sound to some of their music, but definitely a real modern feel to the album. It's not stuck in the 70s or 80s. It just has that really great new kind of wave of progressive feel. Just super great. Lots of killer tracks on here. Some couple of longer tracks too. I like Friend or Foe, Big Tech Brother. You know, there's some good stuff on here. To me, this is a must kind of, if you're getting into more modern progressive rock stuff that's come out this century. Yeah, there you go. This century. This is not a bad place to start. I think this is an album that if you're getting into progressive rock, or you've already been in there, you're trying to expand your horizon, this is one that you should have. Okay, next up, this is a classic album. Some people might not think of this as a progressive rock album, maybe a little bit more bluesy or poppy. It does have lots of blues and pop elements to the music, but the cover and a lot of the really the complexity of the music and the vocals are so good, and the clarity of the album and its production so good. And I think it's one of those albums that maybe is right at the periphery of progressive rock, where progressive rock and pop rock might meet with blues rock. So you want to go a little bit in that direction to see how far the elements go. You're talking about Crime of the Century, Supertramp. Almost wasn't going to include it because I do not think of this really wholeheartedly as a progressive rock album. However, it does definitely have its progressive rock elements, and it's such a good album, so well produced, with such great vocals and some fantastic piano on here. I just think that it's an album that, even though it's at the periphery here, definitely needs to be on this list. It's an album you should consider owning if you're going to move into progressive rock. So the last two albums, very different, from very different eras. One of them is more of a new band. It's come out in the last decade or so. It explores some bands that are more, not so North American or British. Wanted to go outside of that and show you that there is a lot of, and that you got that with this album as well, the Riverside album, which is a Polish band. This band is a a Norwegian band with lots of really good stuff. This album grows on you. It's only got the 4 tracks. The last 2 Or the last three are really long. The first one's almost non-existent, it's like less than a minute. You got Serenade by Wobbler. I love this album cover. Let's see if you can see it here. Hinterland. It's a wood face in the ground. I love their album covers. The music, the vocals aren't as strong on this with this group as maybe you're expecting, but really good instrumentation, really progressive. And the last three songs, Hinterland, Roboto Industry, and Clair Obscure, all really varied in their instrumentation. Lots of keyboards, lots of great guitar stuff. Yeah, an album that I think this is the album that launched this group for me. That's why I chose it. I have a couple of others that I like as well, but this one is the main one at this point. I think they deserve to be in here because they are kind of part of that group of progressive bands that have come out in recent years that are taking the genre and taking over the genre, and will be the music you're going to have to listen to, because a lot of these other bands are going to be gone. And this is one of the ones I highly recommend. It's one of my favorite new kind of progressive rock. And so I think this album, I decided should be included on this 10 more progressive rock albums that everybody could have in their collection, and will move you in to a different area of the genre. So there you go, Wobbler, Hinterland. Now the final album comes from a classic band, a band that already has one, and I thought it was fitting too that since that band had the last album on the first one, that they also have the last album on this one. And there's a reason why I chose this album. So I chose Relayer from Yes. Do I think it's their second best album? No. It's not in my top 5. But it's definitely up there among the best progressive rock albums of its genre. And the reason I chose this is because I wanted to go with something that kind of brought progressive rock to the edge of jazz fusion, and this album has both those elements on it. It's a great album, very comparable to Close to the Edge too. They're very there's a lot of similarities. They both have 3 songs. They both have an album long track on one side, an album side track, and then 2 smaller ones, but very similar in that way. But this one takes that instrumentation and that abilities and complexity to a new height. Not to mention that it's a fantastic album cover here as well. And you have the same kind of well, you have Squire Anderson and Howe on this album, but both Wakeman and Bruford by this time have been replaced by Alan White, a more steadfast drummer, I think. And not that Bill Bruford isn't steadfast, but he tends to be a little bit more complex. He might have fit very well on this album. And then you don't have Rick Wakeman, but you have Patrick Moraz, who's absolutely killer on this, just killer. And this album, if you're not sure if jazz fusion is the realm for music that you want to go to, this will give you that. It's not an easy listening to though, this album. This is a complex, hard to penetrate album, but after you've penetrated, you will be well rewarded with. Every time I listen to this, I hear stuff that I never heard before, and maybe the best instrumentation album of any of Yes's stuff. So I think it had to be included on this list. I just think it's a fantastic album, and so there you have it. You have your 10 more progressive rock albums that everybody could have in their, I don't want to say should have. These ones aren't as in stone as the first set were, but should have in their collection. And all this should broaden your progressive rock journey, if you want to call it. And that's what it is. It's a journey. And so I'm just going to reiterate them just once. Yes is Relayer. Sorry, I seem to be having a problem with overshininess. I'm not even sure where it's coming from, to be honest. Yes, Relayer. Wobbler, Hinterland. Supertramps, Crime of the Century. Riverside ID Identity. Marillion's Misplaced Childhood. Jade Warrior, Last Autumn's Dream. IQ, Dark Matter. Hawkwind, Hall of the Mountain Grill. That's fantastic. All these covers are so good, man. Gentle Giants, Freehand. So good. And the last but not the least, Eloy's Colors. Such good artwork, such fantastic music. All of this stuff is fantastic. And this should broaden your horizons. And at that point, you will be on your own, taking over the world. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please like and subscribe. It's much appreciated. And we'll be back next Wednesday with another favorites. So take care. Bye.